my official voice.
Yeah. We had to get some pictures because our colleagues in academia won't believe us when we say we had this kind of. And the nice thing is we're looking at this big group of faces, and I can tell you there will not be a quiz. So
we can post something online if you'd like.
Yeah.
And I will not send a bill. It doesn't work.
That's right.
It should.
It should?
Yep.
It should?
Oh.
Okay.
All right. We still have people coming in. There are a few seats here and there, so people will need to kind of squeeze in. But
There are a couple here in the middle.
yeah, there's a few up here. But,
Hold that.
well,
Louder.
there's a number down front for
Yeah.
those of you who need.
Maybe a raised hand would be good. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now
Okay.
raise your hand if you've got a seat next to you.
All right.
You guys are great.
So
Okay,
you
let's-
need to speak louder.
Yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So anybody coming in, if they want to wander down, here's a couple people need. But, well, welcome to
Louder.
Louder. Okay, can you hear? Okay. I'm used to being in smaller rooms where I actually don't even need to use a microphone. So, but welcome to the first of our two panels. We are the Brony Study, and thank you. As we like to say, we've been studying the herd since 2011. So we were there pretty close to the beginning of this whole movement. So, and I always like to start off by thanking you all, because we keep telling people, you know, we wouldn't be doing this, we couldn't be doing this if it wasn't for the response that the herd has given us. You know, that when I tell colleagues, you know, that I put up a survey and a couple weeks later I had 12,000 subjects, they can't believe it, you know, and that. So it's been your motivation to help that has made this possible. So we really appreciate that. What we're going to do today, and we've got quite a bit that we're going to try to cover, so we're going to kind of try to move fairly quickly. We'll see if we may have a chance to take some questions. If we don't, we're going to have the panel tomorrow called the Ask the Brony Psychologist, and it'll be totally open to questions. Kind of an open mic, and so if you don't get a chance to ask anything, or if we bring up a question for you, bring it tomorrow, or catch us out in the hall. We all love to talk, so we'll try to answer your question. But we're going to try to actually touch on two issues today. Some comes from some data we've had for a while, and we finally said it's time for us to speak to the question about the differences between male and female fans. We also have often got questions about favorite pony and what does it mean, and can we tell anything by the pony you choose as your favorite pony. So we're going to try to talk about both of those issues and fairly quickly about favorite pony so that we'll have a little more time for the differences. And you can study, if you visit Brony Study, we don't have this data up yet, but we have a lot of data, including our most recent, How the Fandom Changed My Life. And if you haven't seen that, you really need to see it. It speaks very, very positive to the impact the fandom has had in many people's lives. But let me see, how do I get, there we go. Real quickly, and we are academic psychologists, and so we always kind of view this as an opportunity to actually do a little kind of educating before we launch into talking about the specific findings. And one of the things that I wanted to mention, and that has to do with the difference between the kind of research that we do and the kind of research that some other psychologists may do, or people from some other fields, or even like Dr. Redden and myself, when we're acting as therapists. There are two approaches you can take to studying a person or an issue. The one is what we call the idiographic approach. This is the approach where you look at the specifics. So for example, I'm looking out, there's some of you that are in cosplay outfits. If I wanted to understand why we have Pinkie Pie here and a Fluttershy there, I would want to talk to those two people in great detail and find out the specifics in that. That would be the ideographic approach. But it wouldn't tell me anything about this person here, and I'm not sure what she is. But
the schmooze.
or it wouldn't tell me why some of you are cosplaying and some of you aren't. And that's the other approach. That's what we call the nomothetic approach. And that's where you look at large groups of people and then you try to take that information and find general trends. This is what we do, and when you do this, you collect large groups of people. So I don't look at your individual data. I look at you as one of the 50,000 bronies that have been in our study. The one reason I'm sharing this is, especially when we talk about the data today, there's a tendency for people to kind of want to say, well, wait a minute, I like Fluttershy, and I don't think that fits for me. Or, you know, I'm a Pegasister, and I don't think I like that. Well, realize you are unique. You are an individual. The data may not fit exactly for you, because what we're talking about is a general trend. So in other words, the trend for female bronies, the trend for male bronies. Be careful and don't read too much into it, because it is nomothetic.
There's a saying that correlation does not equal causation. So just because something is correlated and there's a relationship does not mean that it's causal.
And the other thing that you need to remember is that this is self-report data. It's strictly subjective.
Okay, so because I think we are going to present some data that may surprise people a little bit, and if you have particular questions about your own situation, come and talk with us and we'll address that. Now the question about favorite pony, and this data is coming from one of our recent surveys, the How the Fandom Changed Our Life. And one of the things we learned early in one of our early surveys, we asked, please give us your favorite pony. 12,000 people giving us their favorite pony. We had stuff all over the place. And it was very, very difficult to code. It was very difficult to figure out. A lot of people don't use the main 6. So what we did is we forced you to choose one of the main 6. You know, now I know some people say that's not my top pony, but we said of those 6, who's your favorite pony? So that's what we're going to be speaking to, is that data. And when you ask this question, well, why would somebody choose a favorite pony? There's several possibilities. One is that there's something about the pony they like. You know, there's some characteristic of the pony. The second is it may have something to do with the fan. Maybe it's your personality that dictates the pony you choose. And the third is it's an interaction. So it's a combination of this pony and your personality. So those are the 3 possibilities that we're going to speak to here. Our hypothesis is, in general, that fans choose ponies based upon identity. In other words, you're going to see you can choose a pony because, well, that pony is me, or you can choose a pony because that's the pony you'd like to be, in a sense of your personality. So that was sort of one of the hypotheses that we had. And a number of people have alluded to that. Nobody has kind of gone in and looked and seen whether that really holds. All right, and I realize you're not going to be able to see a lot. The data, also, it didn't turn out color-wise the way that I'd hoped. But I'm going to just kind of tell you real quickly what the data is saying, and then we'll get to some of the conclusions. When we post it up on the web page, you can go and look at it more closely. But we also asked you not only to choose who your favorite pony was, but we asked you to tell us why you chose that pony. Did you choose that pony because you see yourself in the pony? That's the first column. Did you choose the pony because they are who you want to be, not who you are? Or did you choose them because they kind of were you, but you'd like to be more like them? So that's a combination. Or was there some other reason totally? And when you look, we also, the ponies, and this is the ranking. Twilight Sparkle was the most popular pony in our survey, followed by Fluttershy, Rainbow Dash, Pinkie Pie, Applejack, and Rarity, bringing up the rear. But now, of course, right away, and we don't want to get into any of this, who's the favorite pony, arguments and that, because I guess what you're going to see is the answer to that is it depends on who you are. Trying to argue with somebody that Fluttershy isn't the best pony doesn't make sense because that person has chosen the best pony for them, and that. But when you look at this, looking down the column, the red numbers are the percentages, and what you see is the two ponies that people most identified with were Twilight Sparkle and Fluttershy. So it would appear that the most popular ponies, in part, are chosen that because as a whole, the fandom tends to see themselves in the bookish, intellectual Twilight Sparkle and in the demure, kind of anxious Fluttershy. When you look at who were the two that people least identified with, Applejack and Rarity. So it would appear that favorite pony, at least from your self-report, was really tied into who you really identify with. Now the question though, who would you like to be if you aren't happy with those that you see in the second column, and the two that come out highest, well actually there were three, were Rainbow Dash, Pinkie Pie, and Applejack. And I think this makes sense. If you could choose who you'd want to be, who wouldn't want to feel like they're number one, be assertive, be hardworking, and be a party pony? I think that's kind of sort of makes sense. The third column involves people who both see themselves and would like to be more like that pony. And again, Twilight Sparkle comes down at the top, Fluttershy at the bottom. When you kind of combine some of these numbers, what you see is that the issue of identifying with the pony, probably for about 75% of the fandom, it would appear that the reason they chose their pony is because they identify with it. That pony fits who they are, and that. All right. The second question we asked had to do with, so that's kind of why people say they like the pony, but we also have some data about your personality. So we can ask ourselves this: if a person chooses a pony, like say they choose Twilight Sparkle, what does it say about their personality? What are the personality traits that seem to be most pronounced for those individuals? And the big five is kind of the Cadillac of personality assessment. There are 5 characteristics: extroversion, low would be introversion; agreeableness, conscientiousness, kind of an interest in following rules, being self-conscious; neurotic, anxious, little scattered; and openness to experience. And so what we did is we looked at and we said, if somebody chose Fluttershy, which of the personality characteristics were high or low? And what I did on this table is I ranked the scores. So where it says high, the red, that tells you people high in that characteristic tended to choose that pony. And that the light blue, which probably doesn't show up very well at all, would be the low scores. Real quickly, what we found for extroversion, the individuals who were high in extroversion tended to choose Pinkie Pie and Rainbow Dash, which kind of fits. Extroverts party, be out there, be active, so that kind of fits. The people who are low in extroversion are introverts. Who did they choose? Fluttershy and Twilight Sparkle, So what this tends to be saying is not only do people choose ponies because they think they fit, our data tends to say you choose ponies because they do appear to fit your personality, which I'll come back to and mention. Arguing with somebody about favorite pony makes a little less sense when you realize if they're an extrovert, of course Pinkie Pie's the best pony for them. If you're an introvert, less so. Agreeableness, highest was Fluttershy, not surprising there. Lowest were Rarity and Twilight Sparkle. Who are the ponies who often will say, wait a minute, they're going to raise objections. Conscientiousness, being aware of the rules and that. Highest was Applejack, hardworking, pony. Lowest was Fluttershy. I think Fluttershy stays away from situations in which...
Pinkie Pie.
Oh, excuse me. Oh, Pinkie Pie.
Yes.
Sorry. Yeah. Well, actually, Fluttershy was the next lowest. I'm sorry, I got cut. But Pinkie Pie. And of course, Pinkie Pie was likely to say, what rules? Rules? What are those?
What fourth wall?
Yeah. Neurotic, high was Pinkie Pie, and also rarity. So individuals that are tend to be a little stressed, tend to be a little high-strung, tend to choose. Now, I had somebody say, isn't that a little funny, but with Pinkie Pie, because Pinkie Pie tends to not follow rules and that, but I think this could be a little bit where people might wish they were a little more like Pinkie Pie, because Pinkie Pie tends to not let things bother her. And then the last thing, openness. Pinkie Pie is most open to new experience. Power ponies, everybody else gets sucked in, and what does she do? She bounces in and leaps in, whee! It's like open to new experience. And the lowest is Fluttershy. Fluttershy is not into new things. She's also fairly neurotic in that. So what this tends to tell us is that if I can look at your primary personality characteristics, especially probably the introversion, extroversion, I can probably predict which pony you're going to be drawn to in that. And then the last thing I want to mention, and this comes back to the identity issue, we did ask you all, and I know our surveys sometimes tend to be kind of long, and you might be thinking, wow, what are they asking? Well, this is it. I mean, we're asking you a lot of stuff. And one of them was we asked the Bronies to do an identity scale. It lets us know some about the process, and especially with a group of 20-year-olds, identity is an important thing. Some of you know who you are, some of you are still looking. You're trying to figure it out. You're trying to piece it together. This scale has 5 dimensions. The commitment dimension means the person's working at, they're making a commitment. The ID with commitment means that they like who they're becoming. The breadth and depth is exploration. Are you exploring lots of things, and are you exploring them in great depth? And then rumination is, do you worry about it? So in other words, some people might be exploring, trying out, but they're also talking about it all the time. They're always constantly trying to figure out, is this right? Am I making the right choice? And that. In this case, and again, I have it high to low, so the scores, and there is 2 real clear patterns that come out, and that is if you look across on Rainbow Dash, the individuals who choose Rainbow Dash tend to be high on commitment. In other words, it would appear that they're getting close to finding their identity. They like that identity, they identify with it, but they've explored a lot of breadth, including maybe being a Brony and going to BronyCons and that. They've also explored in depth. So they haven't just checked things out, they've dove into it, as you might expect Rainbow Dash would. And they're also low in ruminating. They don't worry about it. They, and that again is a lot like Rainbow Dash herself.
I have a question. Why wouldn't Pinkie Pie want to look around?
Why wouldn't Pinkie Pie? Let me just. Well, yeah.
He'll get to.
Right, and actually, what you have to realize, this isn't about Pinkie Pie. This is about the people who choose Pinkie Pie.
Yeah, I know that, but like people who choose Pinkie Pie, how come they wouldn't want to look at stuff?
We'll get to that. Although, like Jan said, they are high on commitment, so they are figuring out who they are. In some cases, that might be an individual who's finding themselves fairly easily. In other words, you go and you explore and you roam a lot if you're trying to figure out who you are and you're not necessarily having a lot of luck right away. But no, let me continue because we're
Finish.
okay. Marcia, did you want to?
Yeah. So let me sum this up. We've hit you with a lot of data this afternoon, and we've got plenty more to come. Some of the conclusions of the vast majority of bronies in the study who completed the studies choose their favorite ponies based on their identification with that pony. They see themselves in that pony, be it Rainbow Dash, Fluttershy, Rarity, whatever. They see themselves, and they didn't put in Granny Smith. But they see themselves in that pony. The second conclusion is that those bronies that choose a pony because they'd like to be more like that pony tend to choose those who are more outgoing and more self-assured. That would be Applejack, Rainbow Dash, and Pinkie Pie. So they tend to want to be more outgoing, more self-assured, and if you've taken a look at some of our data, you know that introversion is one of the personality characteristics of the group as a whole. The third thing, we found that as the group as a whole, the personality of a brony appears to match up with the general personality portrayed by the pony character. And this lends support to the identification with the pony hypothesis. And last of all, Friends of Rainbow Dash and Twilight Sparkle appear to have more stable identities. They're not looking as much as some of the others, while fans of Fluttershy and Rarity appear to be more in an identity search and maybe seeking to establish an identity. And look, you know, you got to remember, this tends to be a young group. The average age is between 20 and 21. And so we do not regard searching, we regard searching as a very positive thing.
13 to 25 and even into your 30s can be sort of an average range of identity development, and when it happens, it's something that's natural through adolescence and young adulthood, and that's something that we see, especially that high search, high breadth, or engaging in lots of different things, essentially trying new hats, trying new experiences, is a natural part of entering that sort of adulthood stage. And even well into our adulthood stage.
And one of the things that we have not gotten into, but that the psychological data has gotten into, is that men tend to establish their identities more earlier than women. Women will very often wait until their 30s to establish an identity. I'm sorry, darling.
No, I just put up the slide. That's all.
Oh. But women do tend to wait until they're older to establish an identity.
And again, that's sort of a general look. It's not going to specifically say to anyone.
And that's not specific to bronies. That's the population in general. Okay.
Right. So the next big thing that we're going to talk about, and this is based on some of our older data. We'd actually presented some of this research at a psychological convention in April, where we took one of the earlier studies, and this was, I think this was 2011 and 12. We started looking at some of the differences between individual fans who reported as both male and female, to see not only, one of the questions we've always gotten are, well, what about the female fans? What about the female fans? We want to know more about the female fans. And what we found is that there are some interesting differences in how male and female fans not only engage with the fandom, but also how they perceive the fandom, how they perceive people within the fandom. And some of it may, and as we go into it, some of it may tie into some other traits, even outside the fandom itself. So this particular data set, and actually this data is coming from last year, year before last. The general demographics for this data set that we looked at about 4,000 fans, and obviously we had a lot more males than females. But our analysis compared the two groups. Our females tended to be a little older, about a year older on average. More educated, but you see that in a college setting. Females tend to score or report being in higher or having a higher sort of education status. We did see some differences in the regions of the world where our male and female fans were coming from. Far more of our female fans were from North America, whereas we had a sort of slightly higher male population from Europe. We had a higher degree of differences in male and female fans who identified as single versus in a relationship. Again, there was still a high number of this, but there was some difference there. And more males, more males were not married. Yeah, put that. When it comes to employment, it's very close, very similar. And again, just like with the bronies in general, when you look at comparing to even non-fans, there's really not that much difference, especially comparing to age between employment and unemployment. Where we did see some significant difference, and that's kind of what the little star tends to designate, or the asterisk tends to designate, is actually the report of sexuality. When you compare male fans to non-fans, there tended to be very little difference in sexual orientation, or at least reported sexual orientation. But we did see some significance between male and female fans, and you actually see this difference show up between female fans and non-fans as well. That male fans tend to be very similar in their reports of sexual orientation to non-bronies and female non-bronies as well. But female fans tend to sort of stand out a little different in how they identify themselves, as being far less likely to identify as heterosexual and far more likely to identify as either homosexual, bisexual, or asexual, not being interested.
Although do notice one thing there, that our female non-bronies also were quite a bit higher on bisexuality. And this is a question I've been asked at times, and I think it's a factor of the age group, that there simply is a higher level of bisexuality in this age group than most people would think. But there clearly are differences in sexual orientation, and we'll mention in a little bit some of why that might be, and it comes back to some of the identity stuff.
So interest in the fandom itself. So we also asked both male and female fans, why are you interested in the fandom? Why are other people interested in the fandom? So not only a self-report, but a perception of how others view the fandom. And we found that a higher percentage of female fans joined after the fandom, during or before season 2, with a higher percentage of males having joined since season 2. So female fans have been in the fandom earlier, or more likely to be in the fandom earlier than some of the male fans that we've seen with this data. We've also found that a similar percentage of male and female fans identify as being part of the fandom. So we asked, do you identify with being a brony? Do you consider yourself a part of the fandom? And it's about a similar spread. So both male and female fans identify about the same with that. And there's a slight decrease in interest when we ask how interested are you, or how sort of involved, and with males and females, 64% to 62% reported an increased interest. As time goes on, interest consistently increasing, as opposed to either leveling out or decreasing.
A little bit of that decrease for females might also be tied to the fact that the one group that seems to maybe be dropping out a little bit are some of the older fans, and if they tended to be somewhat more female, that's going to show up that way.
We also saw some differences. We talked a little bit about who's your favorite pony in terms of personality. We also looked at these personality differences between males and females, and it's important to know that some of this actually is sort of expected to see with a general sample size. So if we took a random sampling of males and females, we'd be likely to see some of the same results. Female fans score a little higher than males on extroversion, where some of the male fans tend to be a little more introverted. Female fans score significantly higher in agreeableness. Male fans tend to score a little higher in conscientiousness, more sort of concerned with the rules and what others might think. You can maybe say that might tie into especially the norms of both age and gender in getting into the show. Might be a little more worried about what others might think of them. Female fans tend to score significantly higher with neuroticism in relation to worry and doubt. And again, that's typical seen with sort of any group. So if I took a random group of students from my Psych 101 classes, I'd probably be likely to see the same thing. And then female fans also score higher on openness to new experience, so willing to try new things, to explore new areas. So in conclusion, sort of male fans are more introverted and more conscientious, with female fans being more agreeable, more open to new experience, and higher in that neuroticism scale.
Let me mention one thing too, that just looking at these results on the surface raise one of those puzzling questions that a lot of times people have. You have a fandom that is 85% male, and yet when you look at the personalities, the males are more introverted, they're more conscientious about rules and what other people, and they're a little less open to new experience. People would almost expect that that would be reversed. There should be a lot more females in the fandom in that. So that's, I think, one of the things that puzzle many people is, why are the males here in that? And that's something we will speak more to.
So in addition to asking about how one sort of experienced the fandom and the interest that they had, we also wanted to see, what about other fandoms? What about other groups and other interests? And what we asked is, we asked both male and female participants to say, how many fandoms are you in? How many groups are you in? And what about these groups? So, you know, are you a fan of movies? Are you a fan of a particular clothing brand? Are you a fan of sports, of a sports team? Do you play sports? TV, blogging, etc. And what we found is that only with gaming did we see a significant difference in more males reporting in that particular group. But female fans tended to report higher in television, movies, blogging, books, clothing, exercising, fitness, and a wide variety of them. And they also reported in being in more fandoms. So that sort of split of interest, and maybe why we see this difference between males and females and the number of males that report, is that because female fans are spreading their sort of fandom interests out more and may not be always on Equestria Daily to see when one of these Brony Study surveys go up. They might be looking at something else. Where a lot more male fans tend to be involved in less fandoms, especially with the Bronies. For a lot of male fans that we've talked to, this is their first major fandom. So that might also be a very big difference in why we see some of these differences. It might be really come down to a number of fandoms one is involved in.
I had an interesting interaction with my stepdaughter, she fits that. I mean, she's in so many fandoms, big in anime, and we had a discussion, and she was down on the Bronies, and she said that her perception, and she said of a lot of anime, was that for many Bronies, this is the first time they've ever been in a fandom. And her response was, they don't know how to act. You know, and I said, I think that's kind of unfair. But that might tend to be sort of a perception that some of these people have, is that the male Bronies simply, for many of you, this may be the first time you've been this involved and this committed to a fan group.
And for some of the haters in the Brony community, they might forget pretty substantially. The lights are going on. Yeah. We won't forget that. Yeah. They might forget pretty substantially some of the backlash that maybe early anime fans, early Trekkies, and whatnot may have experienced, because now a lot of those fandoms are so well established and accepted. They've been around for so long.
Hopefully it's not indication of a fire.
I think someone just hit the light.
Oh, somebody hit the wall there. I hit the... There we go.
So while we're asking all of these other questions about how male and female fans interact and how their interest in the fandom changed, we also wanted to get a perception of why people leave the fandom. Not just for why someone has left, but why people are leaving. So if, we might say that, there are rumors going around that people are leaving the fandom. Why do you think someone would want to leave the fandom? Why would someone leave? And we actually found some really interesting data on how, some significance on how male and female fans perceive why people would leave the fandom. Female fans reported that more people would be likely to leave the fandom because of general drama within the fandom, program changes, specifically during season 3, embarrassment from other fans, were all reasons sort of that they said were more likely to say were why people would leave. And male fans really focused on, the only score that they were particularly higher on was a loss of interest. Maybe not having the time to keep up with the show or stick with it, being too busy, or why people. So there tends to be a difference with male and female fans and how they perceive this, and this may go back to the increased area of interest, looking at other fandoms, being in one fandom. And we might look at this later. I've got sort of a hypothesis that it may also come down to male fans maybe not looking as much at the drama, maybe not looking that much as the embarrassment, because where male fans have to kind of defend that they're in the fandom, they have to argue the age and the gender norms being broken, so that constant having to reinforce and reassure oneself that I'm a brony because of this is why I'm a brony, constantly having to explain it, maybe a little more than some of the female fans may have to. That increases the attitude and the positivity and then the I guess I can't think of the word for it, but that attitude of why this fandom is so good to me. And that can even change some of the perception about what we might notice and what we might see. But on the other hand, I've also seen that male fans are very likely, just like a lot of female fans, to call out negativity within the fandom and to work to better any sort of negative reaction that the fandom might get. We also looked at some other attitude differences, some other, this is just sort of a general wrap-up, I'll go through this quickly, but some other data, because this was a very big data set. We asked a lot of different questions. But we also asked about, and this kind of ties into the identity, we asked about how people find meaning in their lives, or whether or not they're still searching for meaning. We found that females tend to report searching for meaning more in their lives, which may also come to that higher degree of females continuing on that track of identity development longer than males might. So that searching for meaning, actively looking and engaging, ties into that identity aspect. In addition, males also appear to adhere to more traditional male stereotypes, whereas females adhere to less traditional gender stereotyping. When we come to asking questions, someone's hitting the light again, asking questions about what males and females should and should not do. It is important to note that bronies as a whole tend to be far less likely to lay into gender stereotyping than a standard or a non-fan population. Bronies are far more progressive with this data. There are some differences within the fandom, and they're both low, but females, it tends to be even lower. But when you compare it to non-bronies, those non-brony scores tend to be higher when it comes to gender stereotyping. When it comes to male and female humor use, male fans are actually more likely to use more negative humor. There's no real difference in the use of positive humor. But in using negative humor like put-downs and whatnot, and that may come less to being a brony and more to sort of a male stereotype there. And females also report being a little more sensitive to that negative humor. So the type of humor used. And as a brony, we should all be focusing on using positive humor regardless. Positive humor is good humor. Negative humor, we don't like to use. It's almost bullying behavior to that point. So. That's it.
Oh, I need to do this one first. Yeah, we got one out of place here. Before we go, we speak to kind of the sort of one of the last slides where we're going to talk a little bit about the gender differences with respect to the identity information. And also, we're going to mention the typology. And some of you may be familiar with this because if you've gone to our website, this is one of the things that we talked about early. There's been a general movement in the fandom to try to find types. You know, what are types of bronies? And I think this is natural. The first documentary talked about different types, creative bronies and that.
Hipster bronies.
Hipster bronies. But we came up with a system based upon our data and based on a series of factor analysis. And I always like to kind of explain real quickly what it means when we talk about these different types of bronies and that. And it's a 2x2. And we ended up looking at two things. One is the issue of Does the fan find what they would call guidance? Do they find a sense of direction? In some ways, this is the WWPD. What would a pony do? Do you think about the ponies, but also the fandom? What would other bronies do? Do you think that way when you're faced with questions and that? That's what we call the guidance function. Some people, if you look on the left side, are high in the guidance function. Some are medium, and some are low in the guidance function. So that's the first dimension. The other is what we call the social disclosure dimension, because our data showed us that besides differences in guidance, bronies also differed on whether they could tell other people. And so you have high in social disclosure. I probably guess a lot of you in here would fall into that group. You're wearing the Brony shirts. I didn't see people like coming in the building in suits and walking out of the bathroom with Brony shirt on. You know, you were walking proudly down the streets of Baltimore, you know, wearing it and that. That's that disclosure versus the low on disclosure. And I remember the first BronyCon when I was mentioning this, I made the comment, I said, I'll bet you there are some of you out there who your family and friends think you're somewhere else. Okay? Yeah, they think you're at that game, right? You know, that tends to speak to that low disclosure. You know, it's not perhaps safe, or you wouldn't be accepted in that. So when you do it that way, you end up with these 5 types. The social bronies are high in guidance and high in disclosure. Often, as I mentioned, social bronies will wear the shirts. Their family knows they're a brony. Everybody knows they're a brony in that. The secret bronies tend to be, they find guidance from the show and the fandom, but they can't tell anybody but other bronies. So these are the ones who may sneak on and have their OC, but their family doesn't know they're involved, or maybe only a few very close friends would know. Those are the secret bronies. Also, let me mention, the social bronies make up about 30% of the fandom. The secret bronies make up about 25% of the fandom. The hipsters are the high in disclosure. In other words, they're telling everybody they're a brony, but they don't find guidance from, they're not here because they wonder, well, what would a pony do and that. And in fact, they're probably not looking for guidance all that much. These can at times be representative of even the brony bullies. They may not care what other people think. If you say my favorite pony is Fluttershy, they're going to get in your face and try to tell you she's not. And it's sort of like, so they're not necessarily always the best of fans in that way, but they're very open. Some ways, these are the bronies who like to shock people. And in fact, part of the reason they may be leaving is as the fandom gets more accepted, I'm hearing over 10,000 bronies here this weekend. As this gets more and more accepted, what's going to tend to happen is they're going to look around and say, this is getting too popular. And they're going to want to be gone.
With them, it's also important to note that these hipster bronies, they also tend to be in more fandom, and they also tend to have a more sort of sense of meaning in their lives to start with. So the ones that don't really fit that kind of shock category might just be individuals who find guidance somewhere else. They might be old. They also tend to be older, so they might have sort of a more stable identity. And be less likely to say, well, I consider myself a brony, but that's not just what sort of defines me. I'm not really working on that identity development anymore.
And they make up about 10% of the fandom. The hidden bronies, and these have often been kind of the mystery bronies to us because they're not there for guidance, but they can't tell anybody they're a brony. And so a lot of times the question is, well, what are they doing there? They make up about 5%. And I think that these, we have some indication, these are the bronies who may be here because this is the safest place, this is the most accepting place for them. These may be some of your sad bronies. These may be, but they're here because, well, we are here and we do offer that to them. And then the mixed bronies are the ones who kind of fall in between. They might find some guidance. They may tell their family, but not necessarily wear the shirt so everybody knows. So those are the five, in general, the five types of bronies. Now we'll go backwards here.
No, do you want me to cover this? I thought you were, I'll cover this. Oh, okay. So the last big thing that we looked at, and this actually comes from our newer data, where we're looking at that how the fandom.
1 second. Oh, we gotta.
Yeah, you kind of flipped around.
Oh, I see. Well, why don't you go ahead and do this, and then I'll.
Okay. Well, we'll skip that one again.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't have these numbered. And
so when we look at that overall typology, so those five basic Brony types, there's also a split between male and female fans in a lot of cases. There was a large increase in female fans over male fans being social bronies, with more male fans being secret bronies. And a lot of this may come solely down to gender and willingness to be able to say, as a man, I like My Little Pony. It's much harder for a male fan to say that in a lot of cases, might be on where you live and what your parents or what your friends might think, than a female fan would be. And a lot of female fans may have even grown up with an earlier generation, so it's even easier to say, I'm still a fan of My Little Pony. There was very little difference between the male and females with mixed and with the hipster, but we also saw more male fans represented as hidden bronies. More likely to identify with that, and again, it might be because it's a safe place for both. Both male and female fans both appear to seek guidance, so one over the other is not likely to get more guidance or be likely to show a lot more guidance within the fandom. But with the male fans, there is a higher tendency to sort of hide their interests, and that comes to the sort of breaking those general social norms. But I would expect you might see this decrease as the fandom becomes more accepted and sort of everyone becomes a little more open.
We'll jump back here for a second. Remember we talked about the identity data and how that was tied to your favorite pony? This is actually our last slide. And we also went and looked at the identity data and male versus female fans, and what we found was that with respect to that issue of making a commitment to an identity, finding it, the male scored slightly higher than the female fan. So you could say the males may be a little bit further along in trying to find that identity. However, and there was no difference on their commitment to an identity once they found it. However, the breadth and depth of the search, the females were involved in a much more wider search for identity and in much more depth. In other words, when they were trying things out and exploring, they were getting into them fairly deeply in that. Also, the females tended to ruminate more. They worried, pondered, talk about it. Is this right? And am I on the right direction in that? So female fans appeared to be involved in a more extensive search for identity, and they also tended to ruminate and worry a bit more. The male fans, while involved in a search, appear to be closer to sort of making that commitment.
And that's, I was going to say, and that's still very similar to what Dr. Redden said earlier about the differences that we see in identity development between males and females in general. Wider searching, more in-depth searching, and longer searching with female individuals than with male individuals who might be more likely to commit earlier.
Okay, so let's go to the conclusions of this. Apparently, now, first of all, I'd like for you to remember that 85% of the bronies are male, 15% are female, and those, we've been studying this since November of 2011 over several surveys, and this data has held up over all of those surveys. So it seems to be pretty reliable and pretty stable. But apparently, interest in the fandom for both males and females appears to be remaining high, and we're expecting it to increase. That's what the data shows, is that it's expected to increase.
Yeah, The newer bronies seem to be showing a real high level of interest, and they even predict in a year that it'll be even higher. So
And
the
they
newer
do,
bronies.
and they tend to be younger.
And it may say something about the fandom, that this fandom is very accepting of new fans, which isn't something you always see in fandom.
Okay, I've been told I've got 9 more minutes, so let me finish. Female fans appear to be more extroverted, open to new experiences, and have less traditional gender roles. They're not as tied to the roles of being as females as, say, my mother was. Males, on the other hand, tend to be more introverted, more conscientious when rules are involved, and adhere to more traditional male gender roles. So females are less traditional on gender roles, males are more traditional. And I really do wonder if we surveyed the population as a whole, because remember, well, you don't remember, but I came up through feminism in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and there are very few women in graduate school when I was there, and that this may be a trend in society as a whole. Female fans tend to be more reactive to changes in the show, and also to the behavior of other fans. They tend to score higher in neuroticism, which are negative feelings such as anxiety, depression, worry, and also react more strongly to negative humor. So they might be more sensitive to the bullying. Female fans appear to be more actively searching meaning in life and exploring the issue of who am I. They appear to worry and ruminate more about this than male fans do. And lastly, female fans as a group identify with a wide range of non-traditional sexual orientations. One possible explanation of this would be the greater number of females who are searching for identity. The tendency for them to explore identity questions in greater depth and in greater breadth, and they tend to be more open to new experiences, may also explain why they're experimenting with different sexual orientations. I think we have a few minutes to take questions.
I'd like to mention one thing, and then we'll take a couple of questions. As I had mentioned at the very beginning, when you listen to this, you may have seen or heard yourself in there, or you may not have. Although hopefully one of the things that you take away from this is that this is a fandom that's very accepting. It's a safe place to explore.
Okay, and before you all bail on us, would you do us a favor and would you, our website is called BronyStudy.com. It should be easy to remember. We usually post on Equestria Daily and Ponyville when we're going to put up a new study. But would you please take I know it's they tend to be long, but please take the surveys because we can't do this without you.
All right, you had your hand up.
This gentleman down here in the gray shirt.
He's been wanting to.
He's been doing this.